Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to our Crypto Hash Review, where we educate and disseminate information about Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies from a Muslim perspective. And today we're going to have some feedback on the last part of a long podcast. I advise everyone to check it out. It's a podcast between Saifuddin and Tarek al-Diwani. And the primary or the main discussion of the podcast is about riba, interest, and the effects of interest on society and why Islam prohibits it and so on and so forth. So I do highly recommend that you check out the video, the podcast. It's an excellent podcast. You learn a lot of things about interest, which is very important for Muslims, considering that it's a topic that many Muslims either do not want to talk about it because in some ways you can benefit from it, and people don't want to take away that privilege, I guess you could say. The system is built upon it and so on and so forth. So it's a discussion which is very much needed, especially considering that we very much avoid it. But the last part of the section where Sheikh Saif talks or invites, you could say, Sheikh Tarek to embrace Bitcoinia. And when I say Sheikh here, I don't want to get irate and upset saying I'm calling them scholars. I'm not suggesting anyone are scholars. I'm using Sheikh in a respectful manner. The word Sheikh has three meanings in the Arabic language. One is someone who is old, an elder. Another one is a person of respect. Another one is a scholar. Now, as you can imagine, scholars are called shuyukh because they kind of embody all three. They generally tend to be old. They generally tend to be people of respect. And they generally tend to have knowledge. That doesn't mean that that's the only use case for a word. So just don't get upset when I call Saifuddin Sheikh Saif or Tariq Sheikh Tariq. There's nothing wrong with having adab and respect for what seems to be those who are elders. And definitely these two are well more read than I am in many subjects, and definitely have more knowledge than me in many aspects, as hopefully you learn from this discussion. Anyway, definitely I would advise you to watch the podcast, and also if you can get your hands on it, Sheikh Tariq has a book on interest, a very important book in this subject, written many years ago, I think in the 90s. It's written a long time ago, and it's been like the reference point for this discussion of riba in the Western world, and probably even in the Eastern world, who knows. What I have to say here is not intended as a criticism of any individual. It's more of a feedback. Hopefully we can learn from the discussion, a clarification of some of the issues that I've mentioned, and an overall lesson, like I say. Anyway, let's continue.
So that brings us to Bitcoin. So what do you think about Bitcoin? Are you orange pilled yet?
People, have asked me to sort of pin my flag to look. I think one can look at this again from a legal perspective and ask questions. If you want the Sharia perspective on it, then I can tell you that there are certain issues which need to be discussed, and I think perhaps those discussions have not advanced as quickly as they should have done, given the growth in public interest.
So, very important begin or entry to the discussion. And as you can see, alhamdulillah, Saif is doing his duty. He's inviting people to embrace Bitcoin. And sometimes I make this joke, like you're giving da'wah and that kind of stuff. And the reason for that is not because Bitcoin is a religion. It's not like that. But however, it is something, as I believe, it is a tool, a very important tool for a Muslim to escape a riba, which is quite interesting how this topic came up at the back end of a long discussion about riba. These two are, I don't believe, I know some scholars have dismissed the connection, but I think this is really connected. The connection between our current riba monetary system and Bitcoin. I don't think you can have a discussion about Bitcoin without discussing that. But so as you can see, is asking about his views on Bitcoin, and let's see what he has to say.
But there is a general point in Sharia that wealth is anything that's useful.
So hopefully I want to break this thing down so you can learn from it. So general principle that wealth is something which is useful. Very, very important definition. Pin that in your head. Wealth is something that is useful. Okay.
And property is wealth that can be owned.
And property is wealth that can be owned. So wealth that is useful, money can be wealth that is useful, and property that is owned. These two properties, you could say, are the basis that he lays down anyway for money. Now, just on that point here, wealth that can be owned. So anything that has a use case. So a wealth that something is useful. Now, one of the main, I would say, one of the main things that a lot of people overlook about Bitcoin, and I think hopefully you may even see it here. Again, pin this point in your mind as you see this discussion progress, is that people fail to highlight and look at and recognize the utility of Bitcoin. What you tend to find is that most people who discuss this topic, especially those who are skeptical or outright reject Bitcoin, only see Bitcoin as a means to get more fiat, as an investment tool to make money. Even that phrase, Bitcoin is used to make money. Bitcoin is money. So to say I'm investing in Bitcoin, I want to buy some Bitcoin, all these terms still speak to the audience that believes that Bitcoin is something to make money. Not that Bitcoin is money. I mean, if I was to go on Umrah and I had to get some Saudi Riyals, it's rare you say I'm going to go buy some Riyals. You say I'm going to exchange some money for Riyals. And where's the money exchange? You also where's the Riyal shop? Because we recognize that Saudi Riyals is money, pounds is money, and therefore we're going to exchange one form of money for the other. When people say, so when we say money has to have utility or something which is useful, when it comes to the issue of gold, I guess the utility of gold is that gold could be used for jewelry, it can be used for this, it can be used that, but gold could also be used to store value. And Bitcoin is the purest form of money because that is the only utility of Bitcoin. No one has Bitcoin to adorn their body or their homes with beauty and zina. Bitcoin is only used to store wealth to be spent at a later date. That's its only function. So that's the first thing. And the second one is that property is something that is owned. And again, Bitcoin did something which had never been done before. It allowed for ownership in the digital. Bitcoin facilitated the fact or the ability to have something which is pure information, but yet encapsulates property rights. So if I made a poem and I made a design for a new chair or furniture, and I was to copyright that furniture, I'd go to the patent office or the copyright office and I'd register that thing, and they would put my name and say this design is yours and blah blah. But the only way to enforce that copyright is through the law. Whereas there's nothing stopping someone from taking that design of my chair or table and making their own chair and table according to those specifications. I would have to go to the law and ask the law to enforce my property rights. That's essentially what intellectual property is. Because there's no way to enforce that otherwise, because information. Bitcoin, on the other hand, I can prove I own it, I can demonstrate I can own it, and one of the ways to demonstrate that is the fact that you cannot take it from me. That's key. Something we never had before. And I think this is really where the challenge is. Once a person recognizes this is the function that Bitcoin has brought, ownership of the digital, ownership of information, and the ability to transfer that ownership to someone else. Once a person recognizes this feature, then we can start understanding or begin to understand the the utility of Bitcoin. Up until that point, Bitcoin is just a speculative asset. Even his words, asset. Anyway, we'll continue what he says. But as my premise here, I could almost say I am answering the premise of why Bitcoin is money from the very first statement, is that wealth is something that has utility or function or a use case, and that property is something that can be owned. So therefore, I say Bitcoin's utility is the fact that it is money and it can function as money, and it has property rights built within the code. Good enough.
So, there are some kinds of wealth that can't be owned, like sunlight or a beautiful view, or some public, like water, for example, underneath the ground, is definitely wealth because it has a use, and wealth is anything that's useful to society.
So he gives examples of certain things that may have a use case or utility, but it's not property or can't be owned or whatnot. And he mentioned an example of sunlight or water underneath the ground. And I think what's important to recognize here is not necessarily the statement, but the reason, the maqsid, the intention. Why can't I own sunlight? Because I can't actually capture the sunlight. For example, I say, look, don't take that sunlight, it's mine. There's no way to do that. It's just something that just comes. Same thing with like air. I mean, if air is all around, I can't say, oh, don't take my air, this is my air, not your air. I can't capture it. However, if I was able to capture something like water, for example, imagine there was a river and I got my container. I can't own the river. The river's open, it's a public good. Anyone can access the river. But if I now get my bottle and I fill that water with bottle with water, and it's in my possession now it's mine. Because I'm able to actually enforce property rights. So it's not just an issue of public utility and all kind of stuff. So yeah, you can't in Islam take possession of public goods. But if you have able to capture some of that good, then it can become yours. So it's important to understand that nuance as why does Islam not allow you to take possession of certain things? One of the reasons is because it's either a public good, it's open to everyone, or it's just not feasible. You just can't actually capture it. Yeah.
But some kinds of wealth can't be owned. Now, one has to go through this process. Is it wealth? If it's owned wealth, then it's property. Is it a valid form of property, therefore? And is it then the kind of property that you can trade? And there is this progression of questions.
So, Sheikh Tarek, what he does here, alhamdulillah, which a lot of people do, is they explain to us, the viewer, what processes the scholars go through in order to determine whether or not something is halal, like in terms of this discussion of Bitcoin. What are the things that they have to, what are the kind of questions they need to answer? What kind of things are they looking at? And this is very important and very good to help people understand why ulama may accept or reject certain things. These are the things that they're looking at, and this is very important foundation. Now, before we continue, I would like to say, put forward a hypothesis. I say that there are essentially three types of people as it relates to Bitcoin. Those who outright reject Bitcoin, either due to ignorance of how it works or due to maybe an assumption. Well, I guess assumption of how it works is the same as ignorance of how it works. Also, in terms of vested interest, maybe what we currently have works good enough in their view that something that threatens that could potentially open up the public to a lot of harm, which is unexpected. So these basically there are reasons why they outright reject Bitcoin or don't even give it any consideration. Then I'll say that they are a second type of person, and this is a person who has heard the objections of the ulama and does not really wish to step on their toes, doesn't really wish to challenge what is prevalent, and is content in waiting for scholars or ulama to either adjust their view or maybe even maintain it. And I think you'll find there are many people like that. If you go to one of my videos earlier on where I had a discussion with Faris, Sheikh Faris, Da'i in UAE, in our discussion, he made it very clear that Sheikh Sulaiman al-Ruhaili, rahimahullah, had a view that Bitcoin is haram, and that's the view he takes. And he was not interested in discussing the premise of the tahrim or the prohibition. The Sheikh has spoken, and I just say what the Sheikh says. So there's no willingness to really discuss and expand the discussion, because maybe they feel that scholars have spoken. It's not my place to really object in what they say. So I will only just reiterate what they say, or string off the arguments that they bring and leave it at that. There are definitely there are many who are like that, category 2. And category 3 are those who maybe have looked into Bitcoin a bit more, maybe a bit more adventurous, and are willing to say the things that may upset others, that may contradict what others say, and don't really have much consideration about objections in that review. I mean, obviously, everyone has their point of view, but I think I believe that Sheikh Tarek is of the second category. I think he does feel, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think he does feel that Bitcoin has a very strong case, but because others have objected to it, and maybe he sees us others as being more senior to himself, I think he's trodden the safer path of not really objecting to what they say. I feel that, maybe, but we'll see. So Sheikh Tariq has just delved a little bit more deeper into some of the reasons why something would be prohibited to be property, although it probably has a use case and probably has ability to possess and other things, is because of, essentially, it's prohibited. Like, for example, the sale of dogs or pigs or alcohol. So generally speaking, the ulama, due to sadd al-dhari'ah, this is one of the principles of Islamic Sharia, or the evidences, you could say, adillah. It's called sadd al-dhari'ah, closing the doors to haram. So something that could be in fundamentally halal, but could lead to haram, becomes haram. So why would a Muslim want to buy and facilitate, or what, why would a person own a pig? What's the purpose? Unless he wants to eat or benefit from the pig, and we know that pig is haram to benefit from, so therefore it's prohibited. And there are many reasons why someone thinks, but basically the point is that if something is haram in essence, then it becomes something which cannot be traded. But this is, ironically, is not really the view of the Hanafiya. Hanafis allow the sale of these kind of things, and obviously, and there's an issue of discussion. But the point is, what he's trying to say is, even if something is halal, I mean, even if something can technically be property, and you could own it or benefit from it, it essentially can still be prohibited and not money. So that's a very important point to mention.
Right. If we ask these questions about Bitcoin, then we can come to a position where we can say, well, what is it itself?
And this is, again, he's laying down the foundation, the thought processes of what a scholar would go through, before you can issue a verdict about Bitcoin. So he's being very balanced here in his approach, but more importantly, he's trying to deliver to you the understanding behind why scholars say what they say. So before we even get to give the hukum, there's this very famous principle, al-hukm ala shay far'un an tasawwurihi. So the ruling on something is an extension of the correct perception. If you don't actually know what the thing is that you're dealing with, then it's not possible for you to actually issue a verdict. Very important principle. So again, those who didn't hear it, al-hukm far'un an tasawwurihi. So the ruling is an extension of correct perception. So what is Bitcoin? What is it? Very important question. And also what we can understand from this is that if a scholar has not understood the situation properly, then his hukum is false. And this is why I kind of get some stick now and again when I openly reject fatwa against Bitcoin. It's not because I like Bitcoin and the fatwa says haram and because of that I'm offended. No. It's because the tasawwur, the perception that the scholar has of Bitcoin is incorrect. The understanding they put forward to the people is not true. And because of that, I reject the hukum. Listen carefully, everyone. It's a very important nuance here. Why does Muawiyah Taka openly reject fatwa that says Bitcoin is haram. Is it because he loves Bitcoin? Is it because he wants moon money? Is that the reason? No. It's because when you look at the reasons why they say it's haram, none of the reasons reflect reality. Or they reflect some element of reality, but are biased, meaning that they also apply to fiat or even to gold sometimes. So why would it be haram with Bitcoin and not haram with the other counterpart or the other examples of money? So that's the reason why I reject all fatwa that says haram, because I haven't seen a genuine reason to say it's haram. But it's a point. It's a very good point. So let's just see what we can say about what Bitcoin actually is. Very important question.
It is potentially, under one view, a receipt for ownership of something, as a title is to a house, for example, at a land registry. Right, you have a document which gives evidence of ownership of a property. Right, and for tokens on the cryptocurrency system, then I think that's a fairly good analogy. A token gives you a right, utility token or an asset token to a particular, service or asset or a share in it. And I think there is generally no disagreement now among modern scholars that a receipt, a warrant, a warehouse receipt can be used to trade copper or assets of that nature.
So the issue of cryptocurrency being a receipt, is it a receipt for a real life asset? This is essentially what many scholars who have said that Bitcoin should be backed by gold, that's what they're asking for. They're saying Bitcoin should be backed by gold, therefore making Bitcoin a receipt for gold. And because it isn't backed by gold, therefore it's not really money because it's not a receipt for it. That makes sense. So how can Bitcoin be money if it's not a receipt for something in the real world? That's essentially one way to look at it. So he brings that as one understanding of or question: is Bitcoin a receipt for something in the real world? And again, my answer to this will be that this is again of a view that Bitcoin has no function or utility in itself, or better still, has no value in itself. Rather, we need to seek value outside of itself. Therefore, it being a receipt, that gives it its value. So we can see here where the mistake comes. When we perceive Bitcoin as only having value, because it's tied to something in the real world with value, this is the nuance and where people stumble to understand what Bitcoin is. Because back to what I said at the very beginning of the video, they failed to understand the utility of Bitcoin. But let's continue.
This is not actually what cryptocurrency is, I think. I think we have to pass by that potential characterization and ask about a second form of characterization, which is that it is a kind of digital asset in the same way that, for example, a digital copy of my book might be an asset. It exists on a database, it's electronic, and people can buy that because it has a utility. You can use it for your benefit, and you can value it at whatever you want. If you want to pay £1,000 for it, you can. If I'm prepared to sell it for £1, I can.
So the other view, or the other way, the other take to understand what Bitcoin is it an asset, like a book that has utility, that can, so it's an inventory, a database, something that has utility. Again, seeking to tie this to something that we are familiar with, a book, we're familiar with a book, and a digital version of that book would be the same things that we understand in the book, and the benefit would be the knowledge in the book. We can read the book, we can hand the book to someone else. So you can see here, we have an issue of trying to make Bitcoin fit into a narrative we already know. But what we have to understand is that Bitcoin is absolutely new. It's not a receipt for something in the real world. We understand that in terms of paper money. It's not a digital asset that we also know, like MP3s and books. It's an entirely new thing. And trying to make it fit something previously is where we reach that stumbling block. Because again, I put forward a proposal or suggestion that the real problem here in understanding what Bitcoin is that people fail to recognize it is it is something that we never had before in human history, i.e., digital or ownership of information. Ownership of information, which gave us the ability to transact pure value over the internet or across long distances. When we had gold, we transferred the value by the physical transfer of the gold from hand to hand. But we've never had the ability to transfer value in terms of information and enforce that transaction through itself. I mean, I could say I wrote down, I owe you something, but how do I enforce ownership about government? We never had something that enforced ownership in and of itself. But anyway, we'll continue more what we said, but that's the point. So what I would suggest as the answer to the question of what Bitcoin is a system that allows the transfer of wealth and money, or value, I have to say, cross-border, cross-long distances, without the need for physical backing, because its value is held within itself. Let's see.
And again, I think that's not what we're talking about here with cryptocurrency. What we seem to be looking at with the non-tokenized cryptocurrency is a database entry. Okay, and the question that we have to ask, I think, an analogy is helpful. I can say to you, look, a record on a database is a record of a thing that exists outside of the database. If I have a house, I can certainly buy and sell the record of the house, which is on an electronic database, but the thing that gives the record value is the asset that stands behind it. I can live in a house, I can't live in a database record.
So as you can see here, Sheikh Tarek is still stuck on that stumbling block. That value is something in the real world. If I want to if I want to transact and buy something off of you, I'm going to give you gold. The value is in the physical gold. This thing is not physical, but things that are not physical could be receipts. Receipts are referencing something which is physical. We're still stuck we're in this loop, we're in this mental loop of how things used to be. And what we need to understand is that Bitcoin is something completely different. And like I said, and again, I would love someone to give me some more feedback on this if they disagree on this, but I feel that Bitcoin is the first time that we were able to enforce ownership and property and therefore transfer value without the need for backing. That wasn't possible before that. It was only, for example, gold. If I wanted to give gold to you, the way we would enforce that transaction was the fact that the gold is now in your hand. And now that you own it, so you have it. And the fact that I can't make one bar of gold become 2 bars, and therefore prevent what's called a double spend issue. I have one thing spent twice. So you can prevent that by the physicality of the gold. But that was what Bitcoin solved. It solved the issue of the double spend. It allowed for information to only be spent once. If I gave Bitcoin to you, I no longer have it, and that was enforced on the blockchain. And this is the utility of Bitcoin, that if one doesn't get that point, they will always struggle. And they'll be in this forever loop. What is it? Is it gold? Is it receipt? Is it art? Is it this? It's a loop. And this is essentially where scholars who issue verdicts that Bitcoin is haram, they struggle to understand this. And my evidence for this, listen carefully to this one and all other videos where I've discussed other scholars who discuss Bitcoin. If you listen carefully to what they say, you can even see it. When they say you lose money will go up, it will go down, investment, buy. What they are thinking of Bitcoin is an investment tool to get more fiat. Because in their minds, money is only dollars, pounds, reals, dirhams. This is money. Bitcoin is not money, but it's a tool to get more money. And from that aspect, they are talking about Bitcoin. That's why I describe it as Ponzi scheme, because Ponzi scheme is where you try to get money or try to get more money. Bitcoin only would be a Ponzi scheme if the idea is to get more fiat. But that's not the idea. Bitcoin is money itself. So once you've understood that, you've internalized that reality, then it becomes easy to understand everything else. But if you only see Bitcoin as a means to get more money, have a phrase, keep on saying phrases like, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to invest in Bitcoin, I'm going to go all in, and all these words just refer to just a investment tool. I just want to make quick money, I want to make some money. This is what stops people from understanding the utility of Bitcoin. Kind of overstep completely the utility of Bitcoin. And I'll keep one small scenario or small metaphor. It's like a person who came to Islam just to get the war booty. So they've seen that Muslims are conquering lands and they're getting loads of war booty and they want a piece of it. So they say the Shahada, they join the army, and they want to get a piece of the war booty. And they failed to even contemplate, wait, Islam is actually a religion from Allah and it's true. Maybe I should actually be Muslim and worship Allah sincerely so I can Jannah. But if you only see Islam as the means to get war booty, then you missed it. Let's continue.
Right. We have to ask the question, is Bitcoin an electronic work of art, for example, of intellectual property, which I can buy and sell, or is it some conceptual value that exists as a record on a database?
So I think is getting close to understanding it and its true value. But again, there's certain phrases used, certain tasawwurat, certain visualization, which is again hindering its true understanding. Even the word entry in a database. If Bitcoin is just an entry in a database and that's all, then the negative or the incorrect connotations of that is that there is someone who manages the database. Can I trust that individual? A decentralized ledger, I mean, it is technically a database, but it's it can give, if you think of a database as just raw, like just a database, then it can give misleading understandings. So yeah, it is a ledger, a collection of transactions, but we have to remember that no one controls that ledger. No one can dictate who can roll back transactions. I mean, it doesn't function like how banks have databases where they have lists of assets, who owns what. It's not the same thing. So I'll hopefully get the gist. I don't want to spend too much on this thing.
Then the question becomes, should we be using this as a kind of money? Now, again, just a couple of minutes on this, and then you can tell me what your thoughts are and where you want to go.
So again, he's expanding more about the thought processes of the scholars. What things do they consider? Even if Bitcoin, we understand what Bitcoin is, whether it's an asset, whether it's a receipt, whether it's an entry in a database, whether it's pure money in digital form, which is my view. Whatever it is, should you even use it in the first place? And again, that's a valid point. Even if something is halal in principle, can we now turn around and make it money? Now, I think this is more of a broad question in the sense that if I wanted to do a transaction and I wanted to exchange knowledge for a bottle of water, for example, I can make that exchange. And nothing in the Sharia will stop me from making that exchange. But does that make the bottle of water money? In the sense that it is now a socially acceptable thing in the markets? Does that make sense? So I can exchange whatever for whatever, but I haven't made the bottle of water money. And maybe there might be good reason not to, as on a government level, on a social level, make it money. But I think that, again, there are two views about money in the sense of what is its realm. Is it something which is a social construct, something which people as a collective kind of rally around and coalesce around? Or is it the realm of the government that dictates what money is? And I think this is where another problem Muslims have in grasping the hukum, the ruling of money. Some people think it is the realm of the governments, because technically speaking, since Islam, governments have issued currencies. We had the dinar and dirham. The government issued currencies. Then we had al-Marwan al-Hakam issued their own Islamic currency. And so for a long time, governments have been involved in the issuance of currency. But I don't believe that it was something, I believe that the issuance and the regulation of money by governments was a byproduct, was something that came later. Money existed before the governments came around. And governments only came around to help, you could say, regulate or standardize, that's a better word to say, to standardize an already existing system. So yeah, I could exchange in gold, but for me to go to the marketplace and always constantly have to weigh the gold and inspect the gold, it makes commerce long and, arduous, you could say, if that's the right word to use. Whereas as a government, I can help increase commerce by standardizing the transaction and making gold the exact same weight and shape and form, and therefore it removes the need to weigh and counterweigh and account. So these are you could say, it's almost like traffic lights. Governments put traffic lights to help facilitate driving, but if governments never existed, we'll still drive. Likewise, governments can facilitate transactions by standardizing money. But if there was no government or government issued coins, we would still transact. So that's why I'm of the view that money is an emergent property. And that's one of the beauties of Bitcoin, is that we see exactly that in action. We see the emergence of Bitcoin as money on a social level without the interference or involvement of government. And that's something we haven't seen for a very long time. It's almost like we're going back in time to like way, thousands of years, when money was first being born and how it was first being born. We've seen it all immediately in real time, just really rapidly. So yeah, anyway, moving on. That's my feedback on that point there.
There are Muslim scholars who have said, and these are very literalist ones, that only gold and silver can be money, and that indeed God created gold and silver to be money, right? And they have taken a very literalist position and an exclusive position and say that gold and silver is the only form. There's a very close connection with what the Austrians have said in the past on this, right?
So yeah, he's now listing off some of the opinions of the scholars. Again, keeping in line with how he started. He started off by laying out the foundation of what the scholars are thinking about, what are they looking at when they've passed their verdicts, and now he's listing off the verdicts themselves. What have the ulama said? One of the opinions is that Bitcoin, that money can only be gold and silver, and they list off evidences for that. I would outright reject that opinion. And again, why do you reject that opinion? Why? Because there is no ayah or hadith which says one must use gold and all other forms of money must not be used. What we do find, however, is that Allah references wealth and uses dinar and dirham and dhahab and fidda or gold and silver. He references money in gold and silver, but that is more of a reason, more of an example of or demonstration of speaking to the people by what they know. As in, if that was what money was at their time, what else would Allah refer to as money? I mean, Allah wouldn't refer to paper money, pounds or dollars or whatever the money was in the past that wasn't gold and silver. Allah referenced that which was used at their time. The best money that was used at their time. Surely there are other forms of money like shells and beads, but that wasn't the best form of money. The gold was literally the best form and the standard, you could almost say. And it didn't matter where it came from, as in the word dinar and dirham suggests or doesn't suggest, it demonstrates that that was referenced in the currency of kuffar, of Europe even. So it doesn't matter where it came from or who issued it. The fact is that was what was used. So to say that because Allah referenced gold and silver and referenced that mankind loves the gold and the silver, that's the only way which you can transact, I find that extremely weak. And there's nothing that suggests that, and this is the point here. This is the point we need to get. This is how you word it. Don't just think of it as money has to be gold and silver. Let's take it to the extreme. Let's look at what it really means. If you transact in anything but gold and silver, you are getting a sin. When you put it like that, then you have to say, ooh, why am I getting a sin for? As in, Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the day of judgment, I'll be burned in hell for transacting other than gold and silver? Why? Do you get what I'm saying? So don't just look at it as, oh, gold money must be gold and silver. No, look at it for what it really means. By that opinion suggests that if you was to transact in anything but gold and silver, you are sinful. So
there are other scholars who've said that gold and silver can be money, and you cannot prohibit them being used as money because the Prophet, peace be upon him, used them as money, and you cannot prohibit what the Prophet permitted, right? So we have those scholars who perhaps sit in the middle.
Second opinion, gold and silver can be used as money. And if anyone wants to say you can't, then we would say, but wait, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used gold and silver to transact in. So you can't prohibit it. But saying that gold and silver is prohibited as money doesn't mean gold and silver must be money. Or money must be gold and silver, sorry. And that is, I would suggest, as being the correct opinion. Because again, you can transact in anything. As long as the two things are halal. But to suggest that you are sinful if you don't use gold and silver, that is a bit extreme. And not to mention no evidence to suggest that.
And then there are those scholars who are perhaps the most liberal ones who say that we use the objectives of Sharia, justice, stability, and so forth, to judge what should be money. And any system which has low cost or lower cost, that has security, that has justice, safety, transparency, can be used.
So the third opinion, it's a bit hard to understand what's the difference between the third opinion and the second one if you just look at that. So he said that basically we look at the maqasid al-Sharia, the intent of the Sharia, the goals of the Sharia, and whatever fulfills that goal of the Sharia can be money. I mean, that's technically the same as what the second opinion was, because the second opinion said gold and silver can be money, but it doesn't have to be money. So therefore, other things could be money. And I guess these other things you would look at would be if it's useful for money, which is kind of the same as the third opinion. But I think what he's trying to get here is those who have this opinion, or those specifically who said that, have looked at other systems like fiat and looked at the printing of money and said because the money can be printed and it's useful and it can fulfill the goal of transactions, then it can be used as money based on the intent of the Sharia. Now, this little sidestep, this issue of the maqasid al-Sharia, it's sorry, let me just take a step back. So in Islam we have the Sharia, obviously the Islamic law, and the evidence or laws or legal laws are established in Islam by evidence. From the evidences, what Allah said in the Quran, what His Messenger said in the Sunnah, consensus of the scholars, that kind of stuff. There are a few things that constitute evidence in Islam. One of those types of evidence is the Sharia. Is qiyas. Sorry. Qiyas, analogy. So we have something which Allah did not specifically mention in the Quran or the Sunnah, and we wish to know the ruling of that thing, but we can find an analogy of something that Allah did speak about. So I'll give an example. It's a bit of a loose example because there is actually evidence to it from the text, but moving on. So like Allah mentioned, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ. They ask you about khamr and gambling. Khamr often is translated as alcohol, but what it actually means is wine. It's like saying cider, or even wine itself. Wine is an alcoholic beverage made from grapes. Cider is an alcoholic beverage made from apples. So beer is an alcoholic beverage made from wheat and barley. So we have different names for the same alcoholic beverage, but based on its origin. So if Allah said they ask you about gambling and wine, one may think, okay, Allah's talking about wine. Allah's not talking about cider. And here's where one could use qiyas, analogy. Well, the reason why wine is prohibited is because it intoxicates. And that's the same thing in cider. So by qiyas, cider is included in that, although it wasn't mentioned by name. That's an example of qiyas, analogy. Now, maqasid al-Sharia is the same as qiyas, except that it's rather than drawing an analogy on a specific thing. So I drew an analogy between cider and wine being a specific thing. Maqasid is drawing an analogy between, let's say, cider and the general intent of the Sharia. So it's not really specific, it's more to do with the general intent of the Sharia, which requires a bit of research to determine what is that intent and whether that intent can be the basis of an analogy or qiyas. Because of that now, we find today, and even in the past, when it was first brought to light, is that people use this word maqasid al-sharia to lump everything inside the Sharia. And the reason why I do so is because it's a lot more harder to pinpoint exactly where you're coming from. With qiyas, however, I can say, look, I make qiyas of cider to wine, and I can look at the wine, I can analyze the wine, and I can determine whether the wine fits the analogy. Whereas maqasid is wider than that. I'm making an analogy on a principle, a general understanding of the Sharia, which is a lot more ambiguous, and therefore, I guess you find a lot of people of innovation and deviance. They would use, well, I'm not suggesting Shaykh is deviant, I'm just saying, but a lot of people deviance, they use maqasid to lump things in easily, to slide it in, to slip it in there, maqasid, and then we just accept it, because reality is to analyze this maqsid, we have to go quite deep in the evidences for this intent and draw the analogy and that kind of stuff. So whenever I hear maqsid, my point in saying this is whenever I hear the word maqasid or these intent of the Sharia, I am very skeptical, because it is highly speculative. And it's very rarely, if not very difficult to get, I guess you could say, a definitive answer. I mean, anyway, the point is very broad. And because of that broadness, we find many things that have been lumped into the Sharia. One can easily argue it shouldn't be. Like the case made for fiat. Yes, printing paper is cheaper and easier and there's not less cost as far as gold, but then one could very easily argue that that's the point of using gold. It's not easy to produce, and therefore it regulates the supply and so on and so forth. Not to mention that riba, that fiat is based on riba, which is totally overlooked in this discussion. But the point is, this third opinion, it seems to be a third opinion because it seems to be grounded in maqasid al-sharia, and therefore it's almost like a precursor to the discussion of why we were allowed to use fiat. So that's a little basis there.
Right. And these ones tend more to support, they have even supported, for example, the fiat money system in the past by saying, look, it costs a lot of money to dig gold out of the earth. Why do we spend all this money when we can have a cheap system producing paper at very little cost, right? So you have this range of opinions.
So, like I said, the only reason I can see that the second opinion and the third opinion is different is maybe because the third opinion is grounded in maqasid al-sharia, and therefore it opens up the door to almost anything to be used as long as it fulfills the intent of the sharia. But again, the reason why, one of the examples you can see why this use of the argument in this discussion, especially as it relates to fiat, is that it's looking at it from a very narrow view. Oh, if I can transact and it does the job. Ignoring the great harm that comes through the issuance of fiat, the management of fiat, and what fiat does to society in terms of being inflationary and the rest of it. So, anyway, let me continue. Our point is that the Sheikh Tarek has laid out kind of the groundwork for what scholars do when they decide what is halal and haram, the three different opinions he views around what money should be. And it's not talking about Bitcoin yet. It's just talking about, this is just talking about what money should be. And now we're going to move on. But I think you can guess that I'm more of the second view, or the second opinion, that gold and silver can be money, like anything can be money. And I guess you could say almost in a way agree with the third opinion, as long as it agrees with the maqasid al-sharia. But I guess my caveat would be as long as it actually agrees with the intent of the sharia, which means looking at it properly, because if you do the same with fiat and come to the conclusion that fiat is halal, which is maqasid al-sharia, then that's not looking at it properly, because we'll see.
One thing that I would say is that at the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, they were discussing using camel skin as leather, right? They had that discussion. They decided not to. Not because they thought that gold and silver only should be money, but because they thought that too many camels would be killed in the race to acquire camel skin money, right? This is a very important point, because it means that something that is permitted, a camel and camel skin, and you can sell and buy camel skin, was not adopted on the wider economic case that we don't want to go destroying our stock of camels in a race for money.
Now, this was a very interesting point, although I have a slight different take on the conclusion. But the point was, camels, can we use camel's hide as money? And no, because we're going to kill off all the camels, because if it becomes money, then everyone will just do that. But I don't see that was the real reason, because, or even the discussion. I mean, should we use camel's hide as money? Well, you could anyway. I mean, even before they discussed it, and even after they discussed it, I can still transact in camel's hide. So I think the discussion was more of standardizing and mandating the use of camel's hide as money, as opposed to whether camel's hide could be used as money. You understand the difference? So it's not, I don't think the discussion was, can you use camel's hide in a transaction? It was more of, should we make it mandatory to do so? But like I said, if I killed 1,000 camels and harvested their skin and made it into leather, that has value. And I can transact in that, whoever wants to take it. And there's nothing in the Sharia that will stop me from doing that. And no Umar al-Khattab or any scholar has ever prohibited you from transacting in camel's hide. So I think that maybe that's a better way to understand that discussion that happened in the past. Because the result of that discussion, you could say, never resulted in any prohibition to use camel's hide in a transaction. That makes sense. But the point is, he's mentioning here is that the reason why it wasn't used as a standard for money or whatnot was because if we do say that, and say now, in the marketplace, if you want to transact, you have to use camel's hide, that would lead to people to all go out and slaughter their camels, harvest their skins, and go out buying stuff with it. Because you've made it mandatory to accept it as payment. Where before that discussion, it wasn't mandatory to accept it as payment. I could go to the marketplace and say, look, I have some camel skin, do you want to accept it? I'll say, no, I want some gold. I don't need camel skin. Only if they needed it, they would accept it. But making it a law, a rule, that you must accept it, now the value of camel's hide has become a lot more than just camel's hide. It's not just that, it's now a medium of exchange. I can now use that to buy anything I want, and I can guarantee that the next guy is going to take it from me because he has to. So that is a very different discussion. And I think that also is interesting, because does Sheikh Tarek think that when it comes to making Bitcoin as money, does he think that the discussion is about making it mandatory to accept as money? And I think if that's what he or anyone else thinks, then that's also a bit of a red herring. No Bitcoiner, even that as well, says that we believe you must accept Bitcoin in a transaction. Because we also know that I can't force anyone to accept the dinar or dirham, or the real or the pound or the franc. If I go to Germany, I can't force someone to accept the dollar. If I go to Saudi Arabia, I can't force someone to accept rupees, Pakistani rupees. If they want to accept it, they could, but they don't have to. Now, in some countries, they make it mandatory for them to accept local currencies. That's by law. But the point is that money is not just something that the law dictates you must accept. It's whatever society decides collectively that they will accept as a medium of exchange. And it brings back to the discussion of, is money an emergent feature of social norms, or is money something which the government dictates? If you have the view that money is what government dictates, then this makes sense. This whole discussion makes sense. But if you believe, which is what I believe, that money is something which is socially acceptable, if people accept it, then it becomes money. If they accept it as money, regardless of what the government says, then it doesn't make sense. But again, I'm diverting again. The point is, it's possible that scholars will determine that something shouldn't be allowed due to wider implications of using that thing. And I'll give one example before we move on of someone who had that opinion. Well, a scholar of Kuwait, in his fatwa, he said, and I quote, I don't quote verbatim, but I quote, he said, "I don't say that Bitcoin is not money, as in it can't be used as a medium of exchange, but I say it is prohibited because it harms the central bank." So this is an example of prohibiting Bitcoin due to what he perceives to be a greater harm, i.e., harming the ability for the central banks to regulate the economy through inflation rates, ignoring the fact that the whole function of the central bank are to engage in riba, a major sin, and enforce that system upon its people. Let's ignore that first fact and accept the fact that that's just how it is. Then he determined that it is haram. And I would argue by saying, Sheikh, why are you prohibiting Muslims to exit the riba system because you want to preserve the riba system? Anyway, moving on.
And remember that this has many feedbacks in it. Money is something that is used to buy things. If we kill all the things that we would buy, if we destroy them all, then what's the point in having money? So there has to be a balance. And this is one thing that is in favour of gold and silver, that, gold and silver is produced if the value of money is high, if there's a shortage, because the cost of buying the capital equipment to mine the gold and silver will be low when the cost of money is high. Yeah? When gold is expensive, it means capital prices are low. Yeah? So the one is the corollary of the other. So shortage of money, gold expensive, prices low. Buy capital equipment, produce gold supply increases, prices decrease, capital equipment becomes expensive. Can't buy capital equipment to produce gold because there's not a profit in it. And so we have this kind of level, there's a natural balance.
And what he mentions here, again, beautiful point here, Sheikh Tarek. Up until this point, I would say he's almost a Bitcoiner. And I think deep down, he really is. But like I said, I think he's of category 2. Those who don't really want to step on the toes of those who they feel are more senior to them and are just waiting for the scholars to issue a different verdict, rather than coming out and saying what they may even feel themselves. Or maybe not just confident in themselves, but rather be more confident if someone more senior to them accepts it. But anyway, he mentions the issue of supply and demand, basically. One of the features of gold is that we have two things. We have the cost of production and the value and the market value. If it costs £9 to produce gold and the value of that gold would be £10, then there was a £1 spread. As in, there's a £1 markup. I can make £1 in mining gold. But if for example the price of gold goes up to £20, but the cost of producing gold still remains at £9, then there's a massive spread. You're making £11 every time you mine gold. You're making £11 per ounce. That's a massive spread. And that massive spread, that huge markup, would cause more people to come into the market and mine gold, and that will bring more gold onto the market, more supply, and that increased supply onto the market will actually bring the price back down to cost price, or that back down to the cost of production. So you have this equilibrium. If the price of gold goes up, the supply comes in, more people come in, and the price of gold comes down to equilibrium. And likewise, if the price of gold goes down, people start mining, less supply comes in the market, and then the price comes up to match it. So we have this equilibrium. And again, if Sheikh Tarek applies this principle fairly, we'll see the same thing happens with Bitcoin. But the difference is that Bitcoin, we can't actually adjust the supply. The supply is fixed. There's nothing we can do to really increase the amount of Bitcoin onto the market. It would always be the same. And that's why the price dynamics of Bitcoin kind of match the issuance. So whenever we have the halving, when the amount of Bitcoin that's in the market goes by half, we find that the market tries to adjust, and that's where the price goes up until we reach equilibrium for a bit, and then the next halving comes and the price adjusts again. But that's not a discussion. It's just to make an allusion to the price volatility. But the point is, we have this equilibrium, and that's one of the reasons why gold achieved its feature, because the production was quite difficult to bring on the market, and we kind of have this slow moving market, as opposed to things that can be produced quickly, like tulips, and they tend to have exit more bubbly, or can be very bubbly. Anyway, we'll see that more later on.
And we have to think about, these wider economic connotations and not just look at the narrow legal position. But that narrow legal position is where I believe we start. So question, is it a receipt for ownership? Is it digital art, intellectual property of a kind? Is it a conceptual value that resides on a database and we use it because it's cheaper, more transparent, so forth, and we justify it on the objectives of the religion?
Yeah, so that whole introduction there was him laying down the groundwork and the foundation for the discussion with the ulama. And if you notice, he hasn't really passed an opinion himself. He's just laying down the groundwork as to what is the discussion. And let's see what Sheikh Saifuddin has to reply to that.
I would say it's not a receipt, because it is the good in itself. So a lot of people say, well, Bitcoin is backed by nothing. And the answer to that is Bitcoin is itself the backing of other things. You can have things backed by Bitcoin. In other words, gold is not backed by anything either. It itself has its value.
So like I said earlier on, people fail to understand the utility of Bitcoin. And that's why they fail to understand that its value is in itself. Yes, it's not physical, but we all understand now that things that don't have a physical being, they can still have value. So Bitcoin doesn't need a backing, therefore it is not a receipt for something else. It, in of itself, is the value. Sure, he's got it right.
Now, yes, you can't hold it physically, but just because you can't hold it physically, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have value. I mean, and I think this shouldn't be something difficult for a Muslim scholar to understand.
So, again, just being very simple, if we believe that Bitcoin has to have physical, or that money has to be physical, because physical is the only thing that has value, as the Sheikh rightly said, there are many things that have value that are not physical, and that's not outside the realms of debate. Straightforward.
I am no sheikh, but I don't see a reason why this would be haram. The fact that the price goes up and down is not a problem with Bitcoin. It's a problem with the fiat monetary system, and it causes the price of everything to go up and down.
I think the price volatility is not the issue. Subject to freedom of contract, of course, but per se, price volatility is not the issue. There were people who went to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and asked him to regulate the price of wheat during a famine, and he refused because he knew that you have to address the cause of the problem, not the results of it.
So, Sheikh Tarek, if you're watching this, let me know if I'm right about this one. Now, we start seeing a list of reasons, or I guess you could say defenses of Bitcoin, almost as if Sheikh Tarek is inviting Saifuddin to Bitcoin, as if he's trying to orange pill him. So he answers that the volatility isn't an issue. And he mentioned an example of volatility of certain prices, things at the time, Mr. Allah, and said not to basically, he refused to regulate the thing because of what he perceives, or what the Sheikh said is that he understood that he wanted to address the root cause of the volatility or the price increase as opposed to just fix it externally. Now, I object to that point there. I'll get back to that in a minute. But the point here is that we will see from here a list of defenses for Bitcoin. And this leads me to believe that Sheikh Tarek has done some research. He's looked into the issue a bit more. He is, I guess, open to the idea that Bitcoin is money, but still he's in the category of category number 2. He doesn't really want to come out and say something that opposes what scholars have said without a scholar first saying it first. I think that's more the area is saying, because he does bring the arguments, but he also even refutes the arguments. So he actually refuted the volatility argument. And as you've seen in my previous video, the volatility argument is one of the major arguments against Bitcoin by many of the scholars, or if not all of the scholars who are objected to Bitcoin. Those who say Bitcoin is haram, the first and last reason is why they say it is because it's volatile. And he says here, that volatility is not an issue. So, yeah. But one issue I objected is that he mentioned about the hadith where the Sahaba said, Sa'id lana, fix the prices for us, the price went up. And he said that the reason behind it was because he wanted to address the root cause as opposed to the symptom. Now, that's speculation. And I think that's speculation in the face of Nas, speculation in the face of the text. The hadith actually stipulated the reason why. So the Messenger of Allah said, I don't want to meet Allah Yawm al-Qiyamah and have anyone against me a madhlama, a claim of oppression. Meaning, if the Messenger of Allah was to fix the price to something, there will be oppression. Meaning that someone will be forced to sell their item at a discount, or someone will be forced to buy something above its market value. Meaning that dictating the price, by its very nature, means oppression. Because to dictate the price means to force someone to engage in a transaction they're not happy with. And every transaction, the basis of a transaction is taradi. Both parties are happy. So I think that is the basis for the prohibition. Not that it was root cause, not root cause, because it is literally what it is. So if the government says minimum wages is £10, that's basically saying to any employer who wants to employ someone for a job that doesn't deserve as much as £10 an hour, you must pay them more than what they deserve. You must pay them what you are not happy to pay them, otherwise we'll beat you or we will inflict violence onto you. That's why it's oppression. And the markets are open, Islamically speaking. The markets are there as it's based upon taradi, when both parties are happy. So this is an example of we find in the Middle East, when people say, oh, these Arabs, they employed these Asians for super cheap, for pennies. Well, those pennies are worth the hours that they spent, otherwise they wouldn't do that job. Listen carefully, everyone. I know some people might be upset with what I have to say, but the reality is, those pennies are pounds to them back home. Otherwise, they wouldn't go through so much hardship to do so. Many of these people who get this really low wages send it back home and build all sorts of things, houses, put the kids through school, because it's worth a lot to them and they are willing to pay or work for that value. An employer can only employ someone if they're happy to take that money. But if I stipulate minimum wage, I am now forcing someone to pay something that they are not happy to pay. Hence the tadhalum, as in the oppression. But yeah, the point is he's trying to orange pill safety now.
Really, one has to focus on the narrow legal issues first. And I think intellectual property rights are widely accepted now. I think there are very few serious scholars, in fact none that I know, who don't accept patents, for example, intellectual property rights as a genuine form of asset. And indeed, I don't think them, in modernity with inventions and designs and so you need patents. And these things exist digitally. There isn't a physical thing to them, really. So that kind of right, I think, is accepted. Now,
so just very quickly, he's essentially saying that he's acknowledged that no one really rejects the idea that something digital or information-based can't be owned. So he's defending it. As a Bitcoin is something that can be owned, even though it's digital. So he's accepting that premise that, yeah, things can be owned, although they're not physical. And he gives an example of intellectual property. So yeah, go for it, man, Tarek.
there is another issue that we need to look at, and the objectives of the Sharia, of course, are relevant here, because we may still make a judgment that says that Bitcoin is actually not fulfilling the requirements of Islamic law, but it is actually a lot better than the thing we're using at the moment, which is the fiat money system, right? So there is this lesser of two evils argument, and I kind of put that into the objectives category, when we look at reasons for.
And again, another argument, this is the what if, or even walau, the even if argument. You have that a lot sometimes in the books of fiqh when they discuss issues. They say, even if X, Y, Z happens, it's still valid, basically. So he's saying here, he's preempting an objection or a future prohibition. Even if we were to find that Bitcoin is actually not money, or is even haram to use, it could actually be the lesser harm than riba. So he's made 3 cases for Bitcoin already. Yeah. So that's something very promising. But let's continue first before we get too happy.
Actually, let me say the basis of Islamic law is a prohibitions-based law. We don't look to see whether something's permissible. We look to see whether something's prohibited. So the rules list what is prohibited, right? And then if we don't see any of these prohibitions being relevant to a particular issue, then it's permitted by default.
Yeah.
So we have to look at it on that basis.
And we have another evidence here from Sheikh Tarek. And this is the basis of all discussion about Bitcoin. I've mentioned in my series dealing with the halalness of Bitcoin. The very first premise I established is the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, where it says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ لَكُم مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا. He is the one who created for you everything in the earth in totality for you. And the ulama have taken this as a basis that things in this dunya, in this world, are halal by default, unless we have evidence to suggest otherwise. So therefore, Bitcoin, we don't actually ask, is Bitcoin halal? That's actually the wrong question from the basis of the Sharia. The correct question is what give me the evidence that it is haram? So the onus is not upon us, the Bitcoiners, to prove that Bitcoin is halal. It's upon the other to say or give evidence that Bitcoin is haram. Sheikh Tarek is bringing the smack down, the adillah. Yeah, Sheikh Tarek.
But having said that, then there is this fiat money system which is not transparent, where your money can be frozen at any time, where someone can press a button, in a central bank somewhere, and suddenly you've got nothing. And on that basis, it would seem that Bitcoin is better.
You see it, like I said, he's bringing all the reasons why Bitcoin has strong standing and has a reason to be halal. Is actually highlighting the failings of the fiat system. That fiat is fundamentally oppressive. They have power over us. They can sanction us and block us from our monies. Sheikh Tarek, mashallah, mashallah.
But of course, we and people inside the system have said to me that we cannot be 100% sure that there are no back doors.
Okay. Here's where it starts to go pear-shaped. So what he's talking about here, backdoors and blah blah blah. So in 2017, there was a meeting held somewhere in Canary Wharf area. Sheikh Tarek was there, Sheikh Haytham Haddad was there, other individuals were there. I myself was invited somehow. I don't know how I got my name on there, but I was invited. And some ETH developer was also invited to explain to everyone there what is blockchain in order to facilitate and allow us to come to a conclusion about Bitcoin, about cryptocurrencies. And one of the things that came up was this topic here. Are there any backdoors, or can you guarantee there's no backdoors into Bitcoin that could potentially bring the whole system down? And the guy said, no, we can't guarantee that. And he went as far as to say, yeah, and the biggest cryptocurrency or crypto developers are Israeli Jews. Now, so maybe basically what he said here, seems to be reminiscent of what was actually asked by himself and what the person said to him in that meeting. Now, this is where one needs to do their homework into how Bitcoin works. And it's not good enough just to take things on face value when someone just tells you something. Now, what is meant by backdoors? So if you have a computer, for example, like you have Windows or Mac OS or Linux, these are all operating systems in the computer. No one knows how these, well, let's ignore Linux because Linux is open source. Let's look at Mac OS and Windows. No one knows if Microsoft or if Apple have actually placed within the code certain keys or certain functionalities that allows remote users or allows someone else access to your private computer without your knowledge. So for example, when I think some terrorist guy did some crime and they managed to seize his iPhone and the FBI asked the iPhone to unlock his phone and Apple basically refused. Them saying they refuse basically means they have the capacity. Because they are, basically it's called security through obscurity. The system is secure because you don't know how to get access to it. But it doesn't mean there is no access to it. And there is definitely we have got a way to access it because we know how the system works, but because you don't know how the system works, you're prohibited or you're prevented from accessing it. Security through obscurity. That's the meaning of a backdoor. A way to access the system that is not obvious to you. Now, if you know how Bitcoin works, you realize that question doesn't really make sense, or that the risk factors are not what you think it is. So for example, as one example, there's one video I want to reply to later on. I mentioned that the NSA, which is a US government organization, they made the hashing algorithm SHA-256. And Bitcoin mining uses SHA-256. So basically, they suggested that Bitcoin was actually a government plot using SHA-256, and they have a backdoor into Bitcoin, and when they're ready, they're gonna shut it down. Okay, let's assume that NSA does have an ability to, or they have something inside SHA-256 that gives them special access, so-called special privileges, whatever that means. What is SHA-256 even used for? It's used to find a hash, just a number. And if there was a backdoor into the algorithm, what does that do? What advantage does that give you? All it gives you is the ability to mine blocks faster than anyone else. The system still functions, even if you have a backdoor, the system still functions. And anyway, I don't want to go too long this because I've got videos. I would say refer to my videos about how mining works, how the Bitcoin network works. I have plenty of videos. One referring to, I have a series of how mining actually works. I have a series about how wallets work and private keys and public keys and all that. Basically, Bitcoin is a collection of loads of technologies that we use in email and everything we use security-wise. So the most important thing to recognize here is that Bitcoin's protocol is open source. Every line of code is readily available and is known to all. So the idea of a backdoor doesn't make too much sense because we have tens of thousands of people scouring over the code, analyzing line by line, looking at ways to improve the code. If there was a backdoor, it would be seen. Unlike Apple's operating system where it's closed and we can't see it, that's what's meant by a backdoor. So my first objection to the Sheikh so far, this is the first time in this whole thing, is that, well, not the first time, but is that this idea of the backdoor, it was mentioned in that meeting, but it wasn't mentioned how, because the meeting didn't really go too well because it wasn't really well explained by the ETH developer. But the point is, this threat or this risk of a backdoor in Bitcoin isn't what you think it is, and isn't really there even. And let's just assume that the NSA did have some kind of way to manipulate hash 256, it's not very difficult to move to another hashing algorithm. And it's not difficult. You just literally, it's a few lines of code, and you use maybe SHA 5, I don't know, what is it, 552? I don't know what it is, or whatever the next one up. But there's so many, there are many hashing algorithms that can be used, and it's not easy to change. Bitcoin is constantly being changed since its inception, and if there aren't any bugs, it's not that difficult to fix. And if you can imagine, there's definitely incentive to fix it because it's a global network. Everyone's got money in it. Everyone who builds on Bitcoin uses Bitcoin. Anyway, just want to put it out there.
Well, somebody isn't watching the transactions that are happening within the system.
So another risk, he says, maybe someone might be watching the transaction system, and this kind of leads me now to believe that maybe, and I'm saying maybe, I don't know, it's not criticism, I'm just saying it seems to be, that the Sheikh hasn't really gone beyond what was said in that meeting in understanding how Bitcoin works. I could be wrong, because he has mentioned that he has read the Bitcoin standard, so I could be wrong, but it seems as though maybe he hasn't gone that much further to understand the inner workings of Bitcoin, hence why he has these cautionary objections. Because being able to monitor someone's transaction, everyone knows that. That's how Bitcoin works. It's an open blockchain. The movement of every single coin can be monitored back to where the coin was issued. So it's not a bug, it's a feature. That's how we can guarantee that there'll be never more than 21 million Bitcoin, because you can see where every single Bitcoin came from in the network. There you go.
So, we have to be, I think, willing to accept that there are some unknowns there. Nevertheless, I think if we were then as, advisors to speak to people who are thinking to invest, to take the role of an investment manager, then one would ask the question, look, it may be permissible, but is it wise to go into this? And people who've read the history of the Dutch tulip boom will know how herd mentality can take over. And if one is a scholar, one has a duty to people to say, look, there is a speculative mania going on. Tulip bulbs are not worth $1 million each. This will all be over in a few years and you'll lose everything. And if there is this subsidiary economic issue, we're not dealing with principles now, we're just asking the question, have people gone mad? Are they paying too much for this digital record, right? Then I think any scholar, any person has the right to make that commentary. He has the right to say, look, guys, prices are too high, this has been whipped up and, and who is to deny that? I mean, you can make an economic argument both ways, right? So I think that kind of argument we have to separate out. I don't think it's probably relevant to what you want to talk about. We need to talk about the principles, the legal issues surrounding, what is this thing that one is buying and selling.
So, like I said, I think Sheikh Tarek is conflicted. Because earlier on he mentioned that volatility is not an issue, but yet he makes the case that, scholars have the right to be cautious. Is Bitcoin worth that much? Price is going up, is going to come back down again, back to the issue of volatility. So we see here this issue that he defends Bitcoin and the objections against Bitcoin, or speaks against the objections against Bitcoin, but yet he recoils back to defending the scholars who object to Bitcoin. So I think it's just an issue of being overly cautious. Because again, as he mentioned, I'll refer back to the issue he mentioned about the price volatility. That isn't the issue. That isn't a issue. And prices, as he gave an example of the hadith, where the prices of things went up time and so on. So he's acknowledged that the price volatility is an issue. But some scholars might say the price of Bitcoin is too high. So my take on that line or train of thought is that this is where I believe scholars, muftis and mustaftis, those who give fatwa and those who ask fatwa, need to recognize what's being said. Investment advice is not legal ruling. Saying it's best not to get involved in Bitcoin does not mean Bitcoin is haram. Listen carefully. Saying Bitcoin is probably going to come down in price, it's going way up, that is one thing. That's advisory. I think now is not the good time to get involved in Bitcoin. Looking at Bitcoin as an investment opportunity. Remember what I said to you earlier on? if you see Bitcoin only as an investment, this is the conversation you're going to have. That's one discussion, but that's not a legal discussion. How can one say it's haram to buy something purely because it's the wrong price point? Can you possibly say it's haram to buy petrol from those petrol stations on the motorway because the prices are like 10 pence more than the normal shops? Extortionately more? Can you say it's haram to buy a white t-shirt from Louis Vuitton because no white t-shirt is worth 100 quid? Irresponsible? Maybe. Dumb? Possibly. Haram? And this is where I think we need to make that vivid distinction. I don't believe it's possible that any scholar can say something is haram to buy because that scholar doesn't agree with that price when the market has put it at that price. Listen carefully. The independent, individual view of the scholar can't really trump the view of the market because the markets determine prices. That's why we have something called price discovery. So he can say, I don't think it's a good price point right now. That's a valid point. But to say it's haram because it's, in his view, overpriced. But back to the point. I think, yeah, we see the Sheikh is now recoiling back. He's showing his interest to Bitcoin, but he's recoiling back to safety. The safety of what other ulama have said and waiting for other ulama to give permission. And that's a fair point if someone wants to do that. That's a fair position to take. If only we had other halal alternatives for money. If fiat was halal, in the sense that it wasn't based on riba, then by all means. But we have that issue to deal with. Anyway, let's move on.
Well, here's the thing. Like, this is the thing. If you actually really look at how those bubbles work, Bitcoin is the precise anti-bubble technology in that whether it is the South Sea bubble or the tulips or housing bubbles or stock market bubbles or anything, ultimately, what is happening is that people use those things as a store of value because their money is crappy. Their money is being inflated, so they choose to escape that by buying this thing. And then because everybody is dumping their money for this thing goes up. And then more and more people enter into it, and then it goes up more and more and more. But then what happens? Then supply catches up. Whether it's houses, whether it's tulips, whether it's land in Louisiana or whatever it is, people find more of the thing that is being monetized, and they bring it onto the market and they bring the price crashing down.
So what Sheikh Saif is doing here is that he is trying to address the price topic and or the bubble argument, I should say, by demonstrating that Bitcoin is actually the opposite, or the way Bitcoin works, it actually deflates bubbles, you could say. I mean, because no one can say or suggest that Bitcoin doesn't have moments of price volatility that has a price point which is higher than, I guess, the long-term average. That's the best way to put it. Higher than the long-term average. So if you look at the long-term average of Bitcoin, there are times when the price goes way higher than the long-term average. And at some point, it comes back to the long-term moving average. Those who know what moving averages are, you understand. And if you want to call that a bubble, possibly. But what the Sheikh is trying to allude to here is a killer feature of Bitcoin, and that is the difficulty adjustment. Meaning that, as you described earlier on, if the price of gold goes way higher, as Sheikh Tarek put earlier on, if the price of gold goes way higher than production, then that will cause many people to rush in to capitalize on this spread, and that will flood the market with more gold and then bring the price of gold back in line with production. I mean, bubbles, that tends to be an exaggeration of that, where the price got, like, for example, the tulip. How much does it cost to have a tulip? I don't know, a couple of quid. but the price now goes high more than the house, that will mean that every tulip farmer was going to basically say, what the heck? I'm sitting on a gold mine. It's going to flood the whole market with all these tulips and way lot more tulips more. And that flooded the market of all that supply to capitalize on that bubble will bring the price crashing back down to production cost. That's the reason why, that's basically how markets work anyway. Markets work through spread. So if there's something called arbitrage, if you don't know what it means. Arbitrage basically means that if some place has it cheaper than another place, people will capitalize on the spread. And essentially, we see it in the Quran, رحلة الشتاء والصيف. So Quraysh had the journey in the summertime and the wintertime, that they would go to Palestine in the summertime and go to Yemen in the wintertime, and they'll basically take the spread, take product from one place and sell it over another place at profit, and products from one place and sell it to another place at profit. Basically means in one place it's cheaper, so I could take it to another place and sell it at a profit and capitalize on the spread. So in markets, when you have bubbles, when the spread becomes so large, that will cause a massive flow of product into the market, which will cause the price to come right back down to production and reach that equilibrium. Bitcoin does the opposite. It doesn't matter how much the price goes up, the flow of Bitcoin in the market remains the same. So it actually doesn't have this kind of bubbly mentality. And what you actually find is that Bitcoin's price action strongly correlates towards the flow of Bitcoin into the market and the adoption of Bitcoin to the masses. The more people adopt Bitcoin to use, the more the price reflects exactly that. Anyway, that's what he's mentioned is a very good point.
So gold resists that.
Or, sorry,
because,
Saif, just to interrupt very briefly, and to tie it to Islamic economics and finance as well, another reason that can happen, or an additional reason at the same time, is because they were doing it on leverage that then defaults.
Yeah. Exactly. That's why leverage is haram. And
do you think some people are buying Bitcoin on leverage?
Of course, a lot of people are.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, so as Alan Farrington, who's in the discussion as well, as he brought another scenario of how this bubble thing can happen. So we just mentioned about the price of something going really high, and then a lot of demand comes in the market, and that brings things back into line and causes a drop back into production. One of the reasons why the price can be bid up so high in the first place is due to artificial demand. Demand that isn't real and is artificial, and once that the carpet has been pulled, or the rug has been pulled from that artificial demand, it now collapses back down to the market value. How would you get artificial demand? Leverage. I only have £10 to spend in the market. Abdullah only has £50 to spend in the market. Chantal only has £1 to spend in the market. But we all have an account in some derivatives account, and they give us 100x. So now Chantal with £1 now has £100. Me, my £10, I now have £10,000. Abdullah with £100 now has £10,000. We all now have way more money to spend than we previously did. And we do. We spend all that money in the market. And that causes the price to go up even more than it would. So if that £1, my £10, his £100, that's £111. If we bought that, maybe we move the price of whatever it is 1%. But if you have 100x, we can now move it 10%. And that 10% move that we've got because we just use leverage, that 9% extra is fake. It's not real. It's leverage. I am not actually spending that with my money. I'm spending that with borrowed money. And that borrowed money has to be paid back. So if we are able to move the price up 10%, and then others dive in to also capitalize on this move, and they also buy in, probably on leverage, goes at another 10, 20%, I now can sell my position at a profit because I've got 100x, I'm killing it, and I dump all my Bitcoin on the market, bringing it back down to price. So leverage is not real interest. It's not real demand, it's artificial demand. Same reason why house prices go up, because you have mortgages. that gives artificial demand. I'm actually buying a house with money that I don't have, that I couldn't buy if I didn't have a mortgage. So therefore, I am now a buyer in the market when I shouldn't really be a buyer in the market. There's demand in the market when there shouldn't be demand in the market. That pushes the price up higher. So what he's saying here is that leverage can also facilitate and lead to bubbles, because it leads to prices moving up way higher than it needs to be. And even Sheikh Tarek says, and it happens in Bitcoin, almost like a little jab, a little bit of a jab. And so for this, we have it in Bitcoin as well. And this is why Bitcoin riba is haram. It does think, another one of the byproducts, the evil byproducts of riba, is that it gives artificial demand. You are able to borrow money you don't have. You have to spend in the market that you shouldn't be spending, and that bids up the prices of what you're buying more than it should. But is that to do with Bitcoin? No. That Bitcoin is the antidote. And in fact, Bitcoin is opposite to riba, because you can't maintain a riba system with a hard money currency. But anyway, moving on. Let's move on.
So this is I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. But
so South Sea Bubble, Mississippi, it's the money system is causing them to do that.
Exactly. And Bitcoin is different in this regard, because there's no way of making more of it. And this is the key thing, which is the difficulty adjustment, which means that Bitcoin has a supply production schedule. Currently, we're making around 900 Bitcoins a day.
Yes.
And Bitcoin is abided by the schedule regardless of how many people are using it. So whether it's 8 people using Bitcoin all over the world or 8 billion people using Bitcoin all over the world, we're only making 900 tomorrow. There's no mechanism for bringing a large supply of Bitcoin onto the market that brings the price crashing down. So it's the South Sea bubble that is prevented from ever popping. That's the problem with all of these bubbles, is that they were monetizing things that were inflationary, that can be increased in their supply, that don't have a very high cost of production. The cost of production doesn't keep up with the increased monetary demand. So the monetary demand increases the price for land in Louisiana or houses or tulips or whatever it is. It goes up a lot, but then the production catches up. The market price goes up, the cost of production is low, producers just make more until they bring the two together. And so that destroys anybody who saves in it. Bitcoin resists this because the producers can't make more.
Yeah, so that's basically what he's saying, is that due to the difficulty adjustment, if the price of Bitcoin goes up way more miners come into the market, they try to capitalize on that spread, and that therefore makes it more difficult to mine, and therefore the supply is brought back in line with the increased amount of mining. Now, what I would say though, and I say this to all Bitcoiners, Muslim and non-Muslim, leverage, interest will harm this market. And unfortunately, there are many Bitcoiners who are promoting staking your Bitcoin, not selling your Bitcoin, leveraging your Bitcoin. All these things will actually harm the market more than they anticipate. And how can it not? Riba has destroyed everything else around it. Why would Bitcoin be immune? So one example, and I'll just use that one example and move on. Miners now, for the last year and a bit, because they know and expect Bitcoin to go up higher, they've been holding onto their Bitcoin. And some of them have been taking out loans on their Bitcoin. And what that means is that when it comes due to pay your loans, you'll be forced to pay. You'll be forced to sell. Maybe at a price point you don't want. Maybe at a price point you shouldn't pay. You don't want to pay, and that actually gives you more sell pressure. People will be forced to sell when they don't want to sell. So, and that's something which is known in the market. It's known in the market that leverage has brought a lot of volatility into the Bitcoin market, probably more than it needs to be. So yeah, there's a good point from Sheikh Saif. Slipping in the difficulty adjustment, slipping it in.
Right, so they could produce a second Bitcoin system, maybe.
Yes, and that's why, it's not like Bitcoin because it doesn't have ultimately what makes Bitcoin important, which is that it is decentralized and nobody controls it. So Bitcoin emerged.
It can never be achieved again.
Yes.
So here was a concern, a sincere concern from Sheikh Tarek, seeking to understand. It's quite clear here that he's interested, he's bringing his objections, he wants to know. So we just said Bitcoin supply is fixed. You can't get you can't bring in more than that. And then the argument will be, yeah, but can't you just bring another currency? That's actually an argument as mentioned by many people. Although the price of Bitcoin can't be diluted or the supply of Bitcoin can't be diluted, can't you just have more cryptocurrencies and that in effect dilutes Bitcoin? Because rather than if you have Abdullah and you have Sufyan, Abdullah buys Bitcoin and Sufyan buys another coin. Rather than buying Bitcoin, he buys another coin, and that's effectively diluting the money supply and whatnot, which is, I guess, you could say, type of inflation, I guess, I don't know. And that is kind of true, but the nature of money is that money eats up, it's a winner-takes-all scenario. As in, people gravitate to the money which is the best form of money. So you can say that gold and silver destroyed all currencies before it. And paper money replaced gold because it's more practical. And then credit cards and debit cards replaced paper money. And now we have tap. You can now just tap on your phone. The point is, when people find a new system, they tend to gravitate towards the most effective, most useful, and the winner. And although during alt season, altcoins do come and take some market share, eventually what happens, and you all will see, especially right now, is that the reality comes true. That people only really wanted these shitcoins in order to make more fiat. That's why they went there. And when the market is in a downturn, you find they empty their bags because they never really wanted it. And it also includes in Bitcoin. There may be people who buy Bitcoin only because of more fiat, and once it doesn't go their way, they exit. But the reality is that most people that actually want anything, they want Bitcoin. Hence why you find that in the downturn, the Bitcoin dominance grows and people return back to safety. Yeah, some return to fiat, but the others will return to Bitcoin. So yeah, you could say in the short term, in limited times, the other cryptocurrencies dilute Bitcoin. But I see is that it's a temporary thing, and they tend to return back home eventually anyway. Moving on.
Because basically what happened is that Bitcoin was introduced by a guy who disappeared, and it's been running for 12 years without him. And it has attracted throughout those 12 years everybody who accepts the idea that they don't get to make money, and they don't get to print money. They don't get to live in a world of fiat where they get seniorage anymore. Anybody who wants a neutral protocol went into Bitcoin. Everybody who wanted to be their own inflationary shitcoin central bank went and started their own inflationary shitcoin central bank, which is highly centralized. And if these have succeeded, if you see them even compared to Bitcoin in any sense, they're only being compared to Bitcoin because they're being centralized and they're being promoted and marketed by people who are paying money in order to make them sound like they are like Bitcoin. But the more successful the altcoin is, the more centralized it is. And with Bitcoin, it's the exact opposite. It's becoming more and more decentralized over time, whereas all the altcoins are just centralized gimmicks. So this is why Bitcoin is really the only one that matters, and this is why Bitcoin is the only one that I think I could, again, I'm not the sheikh, but I think Bitcoin is the only one that is halal.
So what Sheikh Saif is saying here essentially is that Bitcoin is unique, and although other coins have tried to gain some favor and take some market share from Bitcoin, the reality is that all the other coins none of the other coins have been able to succeed in achieving what Bitcoin achieved. Bitcoin's history, what it has achieved, its decentralization, hasn't been matched by any coin, and any other coin who claims that they want to achieve that only does the complete opposite. That's essentially what he's saying. I'm not going to go into details because this video's gone on long enough, but the point is that if you actually analyze the unique properties of Bitcoin being borderless, censorship resistant, decentralized, all that kind of stuff, you find that Bitcoin has the only one who's actually managed to achieve all of this. Not to mention that Bitcoin, the way it came into existence was unique. No other coin can even suggest such a thing, and so on and so forth. But what he said is sufficient, and we'll suffice with that.
because with everything else, you're buying, I mean, even if it is consensual, you're buying into something that is just basically somebody else's database, and they can mess with that database in all kinds of ways. And that can you're allowing somebody to print money at low cost. So I think it's similar to the camel story, but there are no camels there. So you're just making the people behind those things extremely rich and extremely powerful in a way that's unsustainable, because these things won't be able to grow into a neutral protocol used apolitically internationally all over the world.
So what he's essentially doing is bringing the model, the business model for altcoins, is that essentially the way they function is that they have a genuine central issuer, someone who issues these coins. And it costs them nothing to issue those coins. They're just a line of code and they have the coins. And then they try to shill and sell these coins to you with all the promises of making money and it's gonna go up and pump and the rest of it. And then when you buy into that, then they dump their bags. Essentially, there is nothing that they are offering that is not anything other than just, you could say, almost like a ponzi, almost like just buying something they issued at zero cost. Whereas Bitcoin, whatever is issued, you had to earn it. The issuance was the most fairest approach that could possibly happen and has ever happened since. And it has many unique features that makes it stand out from the other altcoins. That's the basic premise of why, and so he says that he even thinks you could even make a case that other coins are haram based on that. I don't know about the haram discussion. I mean, definitely, there are probably, I would say most coins would be in the realms of haram because they're outright scams and the rest of it. Maybe not all of them, but definitely a vast majority of them will definitely tick the boxes of being haram due to the nature of them as being just a means for the owners to make money off of you and to steal your wealth. No function other than that. Whereas a Bitcoin, the owner, quote unquote, Satoshi Nakamoto, is for all intents and purposes dead. And even the coins he has, he had to mine it himself. There's no pre-mine.
Yes, and I think in that case,
crash.
yeah, you have this uncertainty issue coming back then. You know, if the value that you're buying is uncertain, and the traditional example was the bird in the air, you can't sell a bird in the air because you never know whether you'll be able to catch it. You might own it, you know, it might have flown the cage, but you still own it. But how can you sell it to somebody? You never guarantee you'll be able to catch the thing. And if there's uncertainty, you know, over the camel in a womb, for example, unborn camel, you can't sell it. You don't know whether it's healthy, male, female, big, small. So, you know, on those traditional examples, scholars have given themselves the right to judge things impermissible based on the uncertainty over their existence or of their value. And I think, you know, in those systems where people have simply gone on a sort of prima donna kind of roadshow and promoted their new coin, and it's just you know, their own laptop. And I read one example about this a few years back. You know, that kind of thing, I think, you know, can be prohibited on legal grounds of uncertainty.
So this is, again, one of those issues that really gets my goat when people bring into discussion of Bitcoin other shitcoins. Now, the example he gave here, someone issue a coin and starts going around and get people to buy their coin and whatnot. That's not our discussion, and it shouldn't be our discussion because that's not an accurate description of Bitcoin. It has never been an accurate description of Bitcoin. So what other altcoins do isn't part of our discussion. So, and refer to my previous video about that because it's something that happens over and over again when we discuss Bitcoin. Those who object to Bitcoin mention altcoins and mention how they behave. And that's irrelevant to us. That's not how our Bitcoin works. But another issue you mentioned is the gharar, the uncertainty issue. And again, just to draw this back in here, you mentioned about purchasing the baby in the womb, like a camel's calf or the calf in the womb. I don't know what it is, or a bird in the air. I might own it, but I can't capture it. These are uncertain things that have been prohibited because there's no way to actualize and materialize and know for certain what I'm actually buying. I might buy the baby in the womb. I understand that there's a calf or a sheep or whatever, a ram inside the belly of the sheep or a baby camel inside the belly of a camel. But I don't know if it's going to live, if it's going to die, what it looks like, if it's deformed. I have no idea. So there's uncertainty in that. There's gharar. But I hate when they use that to regards to Bitcoin because uncertainty in value tomorrow is not uncertainty that is used. everything's uncertain. I don't know if the price of eggs is going to go up tomorrow or down. No one knows it for sure. We can guess based on history that it's going to remain the same, but we don't know. But the point is, I want the egg. So with Bitcoin or any currency for that matter, there are no guarantees of its price. Can anyone on planet Earth guarantee the price of any currency tomorrow? If that was the case, they'll be able to make a killing. If anyone knew the price of their currency tomorrow with 100% certainty, there could be a millionaire by the end of the year. They could trade that. But the fact is, no one knows this, and that's just reality. So the uncertainty in its price is irrelevant. What is relevant, though, is the uncertainty in the thing. If I said I want to buy whatever coin you have, say I said I've got a wallet, I've got a phone, I want this phone as some cryptocurrency. I sell you it for £1,000. I have no idea what cryptocurrency is in there. It could be Ethereum, it could be Bitcoin, it could be Litecoin. That's uncertainty because I don't know what I'm actually buying. But if I say I want to buy a Bitcoin, I know how much you want to buy? One whole one. Boom, there you go. I've got one whole one. It's uncertain. I know exactly how many Bitcoins I'm going to get. I get 1.5 or 1 Bitcoin or 2 Bitcoin. I know exactly what I'm going to get and I get that exact thing. So this idea of gharar or uncertainty doesn't work, and it's double standards like I mentioned in previous videos. Because one can make the claim for any currency. Look at the Turkish lira. Look at the Lebanese pound. Look at the Turkish pound. They're going through hyperinflation. They're dropping their value like a brick from a window. So no one knows if we're going to go up or going to go down. But no one ever says that those currencies are not currencies because of their volatility. Anyway, so just to clarify the point, the issue of gharar or uncertainty or doubt in what it is doesn't apply here because I know exactly how much Bitcoin I'm going to buy and there's no uncertainty. £10 for 1 Bitcoin. He's clear what he's going to get. He's clear what he's going to get, and that's the end of it. But like I said, this only makes sense if you only see Bitcoin in fiat value.
And of course, you may not know at the time that this system is, suffers from this flaw of uncertainty or lack of transparency or fraud. You you need to make a judgment, based on your experience and perhaps even your intuition, that a particular system is not reliable. Now, that is a particular problem because Sharia generally judges on the basis of facts that are observable, not on the basis of intentions. And if you look at somebody and you say, look, I can see, they've got this new coin, but I just don't like the look of this person, right? That is not sufficient grounds for making something prohibited. Now, if you give yourself the right to say that about some other coin, right, not Bitcoin, then maybe somebody has the right to say this about Bitcoin because we do not know who invented it, right? And I think you must accept that there are, whether they're right or wrong, there are sincerely held views that say, how do we know? And can you give a guarantee that next year Bitcoin won't be worth nothing? Can you give that guarantee? Are you absolutely 100% certain?
So there's a few things in this one actually. One of them is about guaranteeing the price of Bitcoin. Satoshi is unknown. Can you guarantee that Bitcoin won't be zero by next year or hidden errors or not? We don't know what's inside it. Again, these are red herrings. I'm not thing, and I think this is this overly cautious nature that many people have or approach that people take with Bitcoin. We don't know. It could be. It could not be, and the rest of it. And it does get tiring after a while. But we've dealt with the issue of Satoshi. Referred to that video about Satoshi. We've done so many videos about Satoshi. Satoshi's identity is irrelevant because the code is open source, and since he's disappeared, the Bitcoin code has changed drastically from that moment. We've had SegWit, we've had Taproot, we've had so many changes happen to Bitcoin. It's unrecognizable to Satoshi if he's ever alive. So who he is irrelevant. But again, this only makes sense to someone who thinks that Bitcoin has remained the same since then. Can you guarantee the price? Can you guarantee the price of fiat next year? Again, double standards. You can't guarantee that price. But can you guarantee that the Bitcoin network will work or that the fiat network will work? There's no guarantees in anything like that. Can you even guarantee that gold that you're going to be transacting in isn't really gold? I mean, we've all heard of fool's gold. You can actually fool people to buy gold that's not real gold. There's actually a major bank in China that they found a few tons of gold. I don't know if it's tons, but there was a large, I think it was in the millions or billions, I'm not sure. I don't want to speculate, but it was a large number of money of gold that was used as collateral that wasn't real gold. So if a bank vault that takes gold in and stores gold can be fooled, that means anyone can be fooled in transacting in gold. But that doesn't mean you can't transact in gold. So the idea of uncertainty in will it be or will not be, these are all just, I'll let Saif discuss this one because he kind of answers this one quite nicely.
Now, people have that right to make that judgment. And I think what I'm saying is that there may be scholars out there who say, look, it seems okay, but we just have this feeling that something's not right here, right?
And yeah, but I mean, look, we have a lot more than feelings as a problem with the fiat system.
Yeah,
that's the key thing.
System, no, and quite. And with the fiat system, there are clear demonstrations that this is a corrupt system, which is in the hands of a particular power elite who will use it. I mean, the Russians have just suffered. If one regards this as reserve money, and suddenly a few hundred billion of it can be frozen, right? Then it's not reserve money, right? So, I mean, of course there are questions, but I'm speaking to you as somebody who is an advocate for Bitcoin, and I'm just trying to demonstrate that there is a range of concerns, and that. Who would know what was the coin that failed in Europe? The one coin, was it? Or
a lot of coins have failed.
A lot of coins, but I mean, billions went, right? Now, at the time that it was launched, I looked at it. I said, "Look, Bulgarian company, Gibraltar regulator." I was thinking, these are not renowned places for financial regulation, but I can't tell you that you shouldn't go into it. I can just say that I wouldn't, right? It just triggered alarm bells, So there is this kind of thing in the background, which is not a legal argument. It's just the feeling of people who've been around a while,
Yeah.
And I think that is literally summed it up as it is. 99.9% of all scholars who say that Bitcoin is haram, they go upon this feeling. And they build all the whole premise on this premise that Bitcoin is too good to be true. Why is Bitcoin too good to be true? Because it never had anything like it. That's just a fact. Like I said earlier on, we've never had anything like Bitcoin. I know it sounds such a thing to say, but it's true. We've never had a way to enforce digital property rights in an information digital realm. That was the Nobel Prize winning feature that Satoshi achieved. He has solved the double spend problem in the digital realm. So it does seem too good to be true because for the whole of mankind, we hadn't done anything like it. But that is not a cause for something being haram. That is a cause for you to research and learn and educate and then come to a conclusion. So once these concerns have been answered, then give an answer. And if you don't know, then abstain. Say what others say. Wallahu a'lam. I don't know. It seems too good to be true. Maybe we're going to hold back from Bitcoin. That's a fair statement. But say Bitcoin is haram because of a list of irrelevant non issues. That's the thing. But like I said, Sheikh Tarek here is basically reiterating the concerns of others. I don't think he feels confident to say other than what they have said. He's taking a cautionary approach. Fair enough.
No, I can see this, but I think the argument ultimately comes back to fiat and the current riba system, and this is, I think scholars are grasping at straws, trying to find reasons why they would say that Bitcoin is problematic from a Sharia perspective, while really avoiding the very blatantly obvious problems with riba money. And this is, of course, this is political, of course, because like in Muslim countries, you don't get to be a religious authority if you go on TV and tell people, hey, you need to dump your governmental shitcoin and not play the central bank game.
Yep. Sheikh Saif has hit the nail on the head. We have 1,000,001 ums and oohs and buts and if and who is Satoshi and how do you know and might be backdoors and blah, blah, blah. When we clearly have a system of haram, outright haram, one of the worst forms of haram, riba system functioning, and no one says a thing. And in fact, Some even say Bitcoin is haram because it actually combats and prevents that system. So that is the point that we should begin with in discussing Bitcoin. We don't look at Bitcoin in isolation. We have to look at Bitcoin inclusion of what we have. We have Bitcoin as a system, and we have our current system. Which one should we use? Sheikh Tarek himself said, it may even be the lesser of two evils. So even if we have the ahs and the ums and the buts and this and that, but is it better than fiat? Yes, it is. Is it verifiably better than fiat? Yes, it is. We can verify it. It's not even debatable. It's known. Why else are the governments trying to make their own CBDCs, central bank digital currency? They're trying to compete with Bitcoin. They wouldn't do that if Bitcoin was inferior. They would say, Bitcoin, nonsense. The fact that they are trying to mimic Bitcoin and imitate Bitcoin shows that they recognize Bitcoin is superior. So let's see how Sheikh Tarek replies.
So all over the Islamic world, modern banks operate, and they operate with the system. And a lot of sheikhs have admitted that, look, this is just the way that the world works, and you have to play along with it. And so it's quite common in many Muslim countries that the sheikhs have said that if you don't do this, you're harming yourself, and you would be you're weakening and immiserating yourself, and that's not something that Islam wants from you. So go ahead. And after writing the fiat standard and really looking into how fiat works, I can sort of see the argument for that. I'm not saying it is justified. I don't have the ability to issue religious edicts, but I'm saying.
But it's a pragmatic kind of statement of fact.
It's a very pragmatic statement of fact in the sense that.
Statement of fact, yeah, it's not even a judgment. It's just a statement of fact.
So, yeah, I get this approach, this non-combative, non-aggressive approach. People in charge, they use fiat, they have central banks, they issue riba, they force the inhabitants of the land to buy properties and buy cars using riba and to issue credit cards and so on and so forth, and they make scenarios and not scenarios, they make systems and build upon riba, and they do international trade and commerce based on bonds and whatnot. Everything is built around riba, and this is just how it is. Why are you fighting it, brother? Because it's wrong. I know you have the pragmatic approach, brother, don't shake the boat. But imagine the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took that approach with Quraysh. Yeah, Tawheed is important and what, but everyone is on shirk, and everyone they bury their daughters alive and their daughters nonsense. It's prevalent in the land. It just is what it is. Can you imagine that be the approach of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the Sahaba or the companions? I think we just need to make a stance. Muslims need to make a stance. Sheikh Tarek needs to make a stance. It's quite clear. He's there. He's there, man. He's referencing what the scholars say. He's only defending. I don't believe Sheikh Tarek is actually defending the qawl. He's defending the sheikhs. He's defending the scholars who have this opinion. I don't believe he has that opinion. He's maybe overly cautious. Maybe doesn't want to come out and say something that would undermine what they have said. But I don't believe, listen to what he's saying, that he actually believes these things. He's just defending and showing their perspective. And even going as far as to justify where they're coming from. And the reason why I reject that is because where they're coming from doesn't add up. It's not reflective of reality. If it was an opinion, if there was two conflicting opinions grounded in reality, then I'll say, yeah, he views the text from this way, he views the text from that way, and it makes sense based on the language, and it facilitates and it allows. I get that. I deal with ikhtilaf all the time in fiqh. But this is not ikhtilaf in fiqh. This is outright nonsense to say that Bitcoin is haram due to a long list of things that are not real or are even applicable to fiat and gold even. Anyway, Sheikh Tarek, I think it's time. It's time, Sheikh.
I think after writing the fiat standard, I came to this very controversial conclusion that essentially fiat is a tax on being Muslim. Because if you are in a money that is devalued, everybody who engages in lending and borrowing is benefiting from the devaluation of the currency, and everybody who saves is paying for that. So effectively, it's taxing people who don't engage in interest-based lending and rewarding people who do. And I think this has been a massive problem for the Islamic world over the last 100 years because they haven't been able to benefit from the system as much as others have.
Potentially, yes. I mean, and they've sold their resources for this devaluating money. So.
Exactly. So this is the context from which you need to judge Bitcoin. I think this is instead of getting into the idea of, well, you know, there's all these sci-fi scenarios about what might happen that would ruin the world. The reality is currently you're using dollars or national currencies of Muslim countries that are backed and based on the dollar. You're perpetuating the system and making it stronger by using it. And Bitcoin is an alternative, and it's an alternative where you can, you know, the more you study into it, and this is really the thing, the more you study into it, the more you realize it's different from altcoins, it's different from national currencies. It doesn't have anybody in charge. And of course, I can't guarantee anything. You know, I don't know the future. Nobody knows the future. I can't make a guarantee about Bitcoin being there tomorrow. But the choice you have to make is not between a world of me offering you a world of 100% certainty where Bitcoin is there tomorrow and worth more, or not. The choice is you are going to be using the fiat riba money that is losing value, that is creating all of these problems, that is against your religion, or are you going to be using Bitcoin? Now, think about which one has a better chance of maintaining its value over time, and then think about which one is more in accordance with your principles. And then it becomes a fair comparison. I think this is where this is the mental leap that people need to make when understanding it. It's not just, you know, we're not looking at a new optional app that we're thinking of, should I download this app on my phone or not? You already have a very bad app on your phone. You have malware, which is the US dollar. So you can't just say, well, am I downloading this or not? Well, if you download this, you're getting rid of that malware. You can't ignore that out of the cost-benefit analysis.
And that's literally where we're coming from, where we're coming to. But you can't get there if all you see Bitcoin is as a means to get more fiat. If Bitcoin to you is just an investment opportunity to make more money, and when I say more money, I mean more fiat, then you miss this message. The message being, you are swimming in riba. You are living and existing within the riba system. We had for many, many years, we had many, many years an excuse saying there is no other way, brother. How else can we transact, brother? We can't go back to gold and silver, brother. Fair enough. Fair enough. You had that excuse. But what's your excuse now? You don't need fiat. We actually have a money superior to fiat. Works better than fiat. You can send money across the world instantly. No one can stop you. No one can block you. No one can break it. It's there. It's money is issued fairly through mining. If you want to get some Bitcoin for free, or if you want to earn some Bitcoin, buy a miner or load up your computer and start mining. It's a fair system. It's a functioning system. It's a superior system. There's not even a reason to have to go back to fiat, besides laziness, because you can't be bothered to make an effort. So the question really is, are you really going to fight our only hope right now of escaping the system and actually fight to maintain the current riba system? So the thing is, people say to me, oh brother, are you saying to me that Bitcoin is going to be here forever, it's the best thing ever, it's going to succeed? I say to people, look, it's not that it's going to succeed, it's that it must succeed. If Bitcoin doesn't, listen carefully, if Bitcoin doesn't win here, we've got another 5-10 generations of this fiat nonsense. Listen carefully. If Bitcoin does not win here, we've got fiat for the rest of our lives. No other cryptocurrency can succeed if Bitcoin doesn't succeed, because no other cryptocurrency can achieve what Bitcoin has achieved. Listen carefully. It must win. It has to win. And this is where we all need to make the effort to make it win. That effort means start accepting payment for Bitcoin. Start accepting wages in Bitcoin. Start supporting business that accept Bitcoin. Start making networks of people who do business in Bitcoin. Start pricing your services in Bitcoin. Start building on top of Bitcoin. This is actually how you fight riba. Not by buying shitcoins and going in the market and saying, I'm going to buy a Cardano and Ether and I reckon it's going to go up. That's not how you win here. You win by fighting and destroying the fiat system. So I conclude here by saying, Sheikh Tarek, please remove the shackles of the fatwa of old that hold you back. Open your eyes and embrace what you clearly see as the benefit of Bitcoin. And if you still have doubts about the inner functionings of Bitcoin, you can call out to any one of us Bitcoiners to explain to you how things work and break it down to you. There are many videos out there. Andreas Antonopoulos, others, even myself, have explained exactly how the Bitcoin network functions. Actually play with it. Download the wallet, receive Bitcoin, send Bitcoin, see how it actually functions. Those are the only ways you'll remove these doubts, because these doubts are only based on ignorance. They're not real, genuine doubts. It's not saying, yeah, I know this thing here can be hacked, I'm just waiting for someone to hack it. No. If you actually engage with the Bitcoin network, you will have full confidence that this is really the only system that we have to work with. Don't think of Bitcoin as just an investment opportunity. Ignore that nonsense. Come to Bitcoin. Anyway, inshallah, I hope you guys have benefited from this discussion. And more importantly, check out this full video of this, because the first part really deals with the topic of riba, and there are some gems, there are some real gems in this topic. And you're not really going to grasp the full magnitude of what Bitcoin can offer you unless you fully understand the true depth of how riba is within the fabric of everything around us and how we need to do what we can to remove it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.